I'm not your man. We're just chilling. Why are you making this weird? After 365 days of cooking his meals, listening to his problems, and being the only person he called at 2 a.m., those 10 words felt like a physical blow to the chest. Mark looked at me with that cold, detached stare he reserved for people he no longer found useful. To him, I was a placeholder, a high-end service he was getting for free while he scouted for his next upgrade. He thought he had the upper hand. He thought I was so desperate for his scraps of affection that I'd just settle for the no-label prison he'd built for me. He was dead wrong. What Mark didn't know was that while he was busy sliding into DMs and gaslighting me into believing I was crazy for wanting a basic commitment, his best friend Liam was seeing everything. Liam saw the way Mark ignored my calls. He saw the way Mark bragged about other girls while I was in the next room. And eventually, Liam decided he'd seen enough of his brother treating a diamond like a pebble. You ever wonder what happens when a narcissist finally meets the one person they can't manipulate? Or better yet, what happens when the one person they actually respect, their ride or die, decides that you are the one worth protecting? By the time Mark realized I wasn't at home waiting for his "you up" text, I was already across town, having the best date of my life with the man who had been the shoulder I cried on every time Mark broke my heart. But the real kicker, the moment Mark found out wasn't through a phone call or a social media post. It was in the middle of his own birthday party, in front of everyone we knew. When he realized he hadn't just lost a casual thing, he had handed his best friend the woman of his dreams on a silver platter. The look on his face when he saw Liam's hand on the small of my back wasn't just shock. It was the soul-crushing realization that the option he'd been playing with had just become someone else's absolute priority. The fallout from that night didn't just end a friendship. It dismantled Mark's entire ego-driven world. If you've ever been told there are no labels while being treated like a wife, you need to hear exactly how this revenge unfolded. Because how I went from the girl he hid in his apartment to the girl his best friend took to his sister's wedding is a masterclass in karma that he never saw coming. This is the story of how I stopped begging for crumbs and realized I was the entire meal, and how the man who called me replaceable ended up watching me be replaced by someone better in every single way. For 12 months, I lived in a state of permanent almost. I was Mark's unofficial wife in every way that required labor, but a total stranger in every way that required respect. I knew his coffee order, his mother's birthday, and the exact way he liked his shirts folded. I was the one who stayed up until 3 a.m. proofreading his business proposals, and the one who held his head over the toilet after he'd had too many drinks with the boys. But in public, I was a ghost. If we ran into his colleagues, I was his roommate. If we were at a bar, he'd wander off to network, leaving me standing alone with a half-melted drink while he flirted with anything that had a pulse and a low enough bar for his ego. It's a specific kind of psychological torture, being a placeholder. You're the safety net that catches them every time they fall. But the moment they're back on their feet, they're looking over your shoulder for the person they actually want to walk beside. I kept telling myself that if I just did one more thing, if I was just a little more patient, a little more supportive, a little more chill, he'd finally see me. I was trapped in the sunk cost fallacy, thinking that if I had already invested a year of my life, I couldn't walk away empty-handed. Mark knew this, he fed on it. He'd give me just enough crumbs of affection, a forehead kiss here, a "you're the only one who gets me" there, to keep me hooked. It was a masterclass in intermittent reinforcement. He was training me to be grateful for the bare minimum. And then there was Liam. Liam was the silent witness to my slow-motion car crash of a relationship. As Mark's best friend and roommate, he saw the parts of our no-label life that the rest of the world didn't. He saw me crying in the kitchen at midnight because Mark hadn't come home. He saw the way Mark would talk down to me using that sharp, condescending tone that made me feel like an annoying child instead of a partner. For a long time, Liam stayed quiet. I assumed it was the bro code, that sacred, toxic pact where men protect each other's worst behaviors in the name of loyalty. Liam would occasionally offer a sympathetic look or help me carry the groceries that Mark was too busy to grab, but he never crossed the line, or so I thought. I assumed he was just another guy who viewed women as interchangeable parts in a man's life. I figured he probably laughed at Mark's jokes about being single and loving it whenever I wasn't in the room. But the reality of my situation finally hit a breaking point one rainy Tuesday. Mark had promised, for the third time that month, that we would finally have a real dinner to celebrate a small promotion I'd gotten at work. I spent 3 hours cooking. I bought his favorite wine. I even wore the dress he'd once offhandedly mentioned he liked. At 9 p.m., I got a text. Change of plans. The guys are hitting the club. Don't wait up, just leave the leftovers in the fridge. Sal, love ya. Love ya. 2 words meant to act as a leash. I was sitting at the table staring at 2 plates of cold food when Liam walked through the front door. He wasn't with Mark. He looked at the table, then he looked at me, and for the first time, the pity in his eyes was replaced by something much sharper. Something like anger. He didn't say, "I'm sorry." He didn't tell me it would be okay. Instead, Liam walked over to the table, sat down in Mark's chair, and pulled the cold plate toward him. You know, Liam said, his voice unusually low. Mark thinks he's the smartest guy in every room. He thinks he's managed to find a way to have his cake and eat it too. I wiped a stray tear, trying to play it off. It's fine, Liam. He's just busy. You know how he is. I do know how he is, Liam replied, on stabbing a piece of steak with more force than necessary. But I think you need to know how he actually talks about you when the guys are hitting the club. Because he's not just not your man, Sarah. He's actively making sure no one else can be your man either. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, sliding it across the table toward me. It was open to a group chat. And that was the moment my entire world shifted. Because what I saw on that screen wasn't just a lack of commitment, it was a calculated, cruel betrayal that went far deeper than a missing label. Mark wasn't just keeping his options open. He was playing a game I didn't even know I was in. The group chat was titled The Roster. I scrolled through months of messages, my stomach doing backflips. It wasn't just Mark being a jerk. It was a tactical manual on how to keep me submissive. He shared photos of the meals I cooked, mocking the desperate effort I put in. He even had a betting pool with 2 other guys on how long I'd stay after he started soft-launching other girls. The payoff hit me like a bucket of ice water. I wasn't failing at being a girlfriend. I was succeeding at a role he'd cast me in without my knowledge. But then I saw the text from 2 days ago. Mark wrote, Sarah's getting clingy about her promotion. I'll give her a pity dinner, keep the leash tight, then tell her I'm going out. She'll have my laundry done by the time I get back anyway. Liam took the phone back, his eyes fixed on mine. He doesn't just lack a label, Sarah. He lacks a soul. I didn't cry. The tears I'd been holding back for a year simply evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I looked at the wine, the dress, the cold steak. I looked at Liam. Why are you showing me this now? I asked. Liam didn't blink. Because he's planning to bring a girl from his office to his birthday party this weekend. He told me he wants you there to host because you make the best appetizers, but he's going to introduce her as his date. That was it. The final thread snapped. Mark didn't want a partner. He wanted a free catering service that he could sleep with. But here was the microhook. Liam wasn't just showing me this to be a nice guy. He'd been nursing a secret of his own for 3 years, a secret that involved why he and Mark were actually roommates in the first place. He owes me $30,000, Sarah, Liam whispered. He used my credit for his startup and never paid a dime back. He thinks he's untouchable because he's the talent. I stayed because I wanted my money. But seeing him do this to you, the money doesn't matter anymore. We sat in that kitchen for 4 hours. We didn't just talk, we choreographed. If Mark wanted a no-label life, I was going to give him exactly that. Total anonymity. The next morning, I was the perfect placeholder. When Mark stumbled in at 4 a.m. smelling like cheap perfume and tequila, I didn't yell. I didn't ask where he'd been. I just handed him a glass of water and a Tylenol. You're the best, babe, he mumbled, reaching for my waist. I stepped back, smiling the most empty smile I'd ever practiced. Just chilling, Mark. Remember? He paused, a flicker of confusion crossing his face, but the ego won out. He laughed it off and went to sleep. He thought he'd finally broken me into the perfect, compliant shadow. He didn't realize that for the next 3 days, while he was at work, Liam and I were moving my life out in trash bags, 1 carload at a time. I didn't move into a new apartment. I moved into Liam's guest room, the one in the new place he'd secretly signed for 2 weeks prior, a place Mark didn't even know existed. By Friday, my side of the closet was empty. I'd replaced my clothes with high-end empty shopping bags and tissue paper. To a casual glance, it looked like I'd been on a spree. In reality, I was a ghost. Then came the night of the party. Mark was buzzing, wearing the suit I'd picked out and dry cleaned for him. The office crew is coming at 8, he said, checking himself in the mirror. Make sure the shrimp is hot. Oh, and stay low-key, okay? I don't want things getting weird in front of my boss. I've got it all under control, I told him. And I did. The mini payoff? I'd invited a few extra guests. I'd sent screenshots of the roster to the office girl's Instagram DM an hour before the party started. But the micro hook was the guest Mark didn't expect to see walk through the door with me. At 8:30 p.m., the apartment was packed. Mark was mid-sentence, bragging to his boss about his lifestyle when the front door opened. I didn't come out of the kitchen with a tray of shrimp. I walked through the front door wearing a dress that cost more than Mark's monthly rent, a dress Liam had bought me. I wasn't holding a tray. I was holding Liam's hand. The room went silent. Mark's boss looked at me, then at Mark, then back at me. Mark's face turned a shade of gray I didn't know human skin could achieve. "Sarah?" Mark stammered, his cool guy persona disintegrating. "What are you doing? Why is Liam?" Liam stepped forward, his grip firm on my waist. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked directly at Mark. "We're just chilling, man. Why are you making it weird?" The irony was thick enough to choke on. But the real destruction was just beginning. Because Mark wasn't just losing his placeholder, he was about to realize that Liam had quietly liquidated their joint business account that morning, legally and rightfully, leaving Mark with exactly what he'd given me for a year: nothing. "You can't be here," Mark hissed, stepping toward us. "This is my party. This is my house." "Actually," Liam said, pulling a folded document from his jacket. "The lease was in my name, Mark. And since I've officially moved out, you have exactly 48 hours to vacate before the locks are changed. Happy birthday." The guests started whispering. The office girl walked up, looked Mark dead in the eye, and dumped her martini over his head. "The roster was a nice touch," she said, before walking out the door. Mark looked around the room, searching for an ally, a friend, a bro. But everyone was looking at him like he was a glitch in the system. He turned to me, his voice cracking. "Sarah, after everything I did for you—" "You didn't do anything for me, Mark," I said, my voice steady. "You provided a trial run. And I passed. I'm just moving on to the upgrade." We turned to leave, but as we hit the hallway, I stopped. I had one last crumb to give him. I reached into my purse and pulled out his "Love ya" text, printed and framed. I set it on the hallway table. "You forgot your leash," I whispered. But as we walked toward the elevator, Liam's phone buzzed. It was a message from Mark's father. And that's when I realized the revenge didn't just stop at the apartment door. It was about to go nuclear. The text from Mark's father wasn't just a courtesy check-in. It was the final nail in the coffin. You see, Mark had been playing a dangerous game of fake it till you make it for years. That startup he bragged about, it wasn't funded by his genius. It was funded by a high-interest loan from his father. And Liam was the only reason the old man hadn't called in the debt months ago. Liam had been protecting Mark, covering his tracks, and begging his father for more time, all while Mark was using that same money to fund the lifestyle he used to manipulate me and the roster. As we stood in the elevator, Liam showed me the reply he sent back to Mr. Sterling. It was a single PDF, a curated collection of Mark's bank statements showing exactly how much business capital had been spent on bottle service, hotel rooms for the girls in his DMs, and the very suit he was wearing. "My father is done, Liam," the reply read. "Tell him he has 24 hours to settle the balance, or I'm handing this over to the family attorneys. And thank Sarah for me. She deserved better than a son I clearly failed to raise." The next 48 hours were a masterclass in the speed of gravity. Mark didn't just lose his apartment, he lost his identity. By Saturday morning, his boss had seen the roster screenshots, which had gone viral within their small industry circle after the office girl posted them to LinkedIn with the caption, "Is this the kind of leadership we support?" He was fired before he could even finish packing his first box. Mark tried to call me. He tried to call Liam. He tried to call his parents. Silence. For the first time in his life, the man who treated people like disposable batteries found himself with no one left to charge his ego. He sent me one final desperate email, because I'd blocked him everywhere else. It wasn't an apology. It was a 5-page manifesto blaming me for ruining his life and accusing Liam of stealing his property, as if I were a piece of furniture he'd misplaced. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because while Mark was sitting in a studio apartment he could barely afford, staring at the framed "Love ya" text I'd left him, I was standing in a sun-drenched garden 3 months later, wearing a dress that didn't have to hide who I was. Remember when I mentioned the sisters' wedding? That was the moment everything came full circle. Walking into that venue as Liam's partner wasn't about showing off, or continuing the revenge. It was about the physical sensation of finally being seen. When Liam introduced me to his family, he didn't call me his roommate. He didn't call me just chilling. He held my hand, looked his mother in the eye, and said, "This is Sarah. She's the most incredible woman I've ever met, and I'm the luckiest man here for being the one who finally convinced her of that." There was no label prison, no intermittent reinforcement. There was just the steady, unwavering certainty of a man who knew my worth from the second he saw me, even when I was too blinded by Mark's gaslighting to see it myself. The most satisfying part of this entire journey wasn't the look on Mark's face at the party or watching his bank account hit zero. It was the moment I realized that I had stopped checking Mark's social media. I didn't care if he was miserable. I didn't care if he was dating someone else. I didn't even care if he finally realized what he'd lost. The real revenge wasn't what I did to him. It was what I did for myself. I stopped accepting the crumbs and realized I was the entire feast. I stopped being a placeholder and became a priority. Mark thought he was the one in control, but all he did was act as the catalyst for my own awakening. He was the before, so that I could finally appreciate the after. If you're sitting in a cold kitchen right now, waiting for a text from someone who makes you feel like an option, let this be your sign. You aren't crazy for wanting a commitment. You aren't clingy for wanting respect. You're simply overqualified for the position they've put you in. Mark is still out there somewhere, I'm sure, trying to build a new roster and wondering why his life feels so empty. But me? I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. I'm not a ghost in someone else's house anymore. I'm the main character in my own life, standing next to a man who would never dream of making me feel invisible. Because at the end of the day, a narcissist's greatest fear isn't losing you. It's watching you thrive with someone who treats you exactly the way they claimed was impossible. The labels are off, the masks are down, and for the first time in my life, I'm not just chilling, I'm finally home. Sarah's journey from being a placeholder to becoming a priority wasn't just a stroke of luck or a coincidence of meeting the right person at the right time. It was the result of a fundamental shift in frequency. The moment she decided that being alone was infinitely better than being lonely in the company of a man who treated her like an interchangeable part of her roster. But as satisfying as it was to watch Mark's house of cards collapse under the weight of his own lies, the reality is that there are thousands of Marks still operating with the same manual. They rely on the silence of the people they manipulate and the hope that you will never realize you are the entire feast, not just a side dish. If Sarah's story felt like a mirror to your own life, if you've ever found yourself staring at a blank screen waiting for a text that never comes, or feeling crazy for simply asking for the bare minimum of respect, then you are exactly why this community exists. We don't just share these stories for the thrill of the revenge. We share them because the first step to escaping a no-label prison is recognizing the bars for what they are. Every story we break down here is another tool in your kit to sharpen your intuition and ensure you never have to hide who you are again. By becoming a part of this circle, you aren't just following a channel. You are making a pact with yourself to prioritize clarity over comfort and truth over chilling. You are choosing to surround yourself with the patterns of those who thrive rather than the manipulation of those who merely use. We are building a library of red flags, survival strategies, and most importantly, blueprints for the after that Sarah is living right now. But what happens when the narcissist realizes they've lost their grip? Because as we saw with Mark's 5-page manifesto, they rarely go quietly. They don't just disappear, they try to hoover their way back in, using the very guilt and empathy that you hold most dear. If you want to know how to recognize the specific, desperate tactics they use when their ego finally hits zero, and how to ensure you stay unhooverable forever, you need to watch our deep dive into the extinction burst phase right here. It's the essential next step to making sure that when you finally walk into your own sun-drenched garden, you never feel the need to look back. Click here to see exactly what to expect when the mask stays down for good.